Okay, in this video then we're going to look at actually cutting the timber to the right size. So I've brought out a range of different saws that we use in the wood workshop. So this one's a hand saw. We have to be careful with this one really because it's a bit of a finger cutter, right? Very sharp, hardened points on the saw blade. Useful for cutting timber. If you know what you're doing with it, it can make rapid progress through a piece of wood. Not really sharpenable. In the olden days, you used to be able to sharpen a saw by filing back the teeth and then bending the teeth out so that they would face in different directions. So you'd cut your wood out very quickly and easily. You can cut wood very quickly and easily with this saw, right? So cutting with a saw, some things you need to think about, right? So use the edge of your finger just to place the saw in the right place. Drag it backwards a couple of times. And then use full length strokes on the saw. Cut through. Focus on your elbow whilst you're sawing. And you'll find yourself going through the timber. So I've cut on the waist side of the line. You can still see the line in place, and that's my scrap piece of timber that I cut off. Okay, so that's the hand saw. You can use a hand saw, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to be careful with it. So let's have a look at some other sawing techniques that I've got then, right? So I'm going to use this one here, which is called a Tenon Saw, which is probably our most useful saw we use in the workshop. And I'm going to cut this this end joint out first, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing. Just start that saw line off. Hold it against my bench hook like this and cut, but only cut halfway down the timber before I stop. Okay, so I've stopped halfway down the timber. As you can see, I've put my saw back in, I hold it up to the camera, right, halfway down, that's pretty handy. So that's called a cross cut. I've cut across the grain of the wood. Now I've got another cut to do, which is going to go in this direction. Now this would be what we call a ripping cut. Ripping cut goes down the length of the grain. So that's one of the reasons why this is called a rip saw, as well as a hand saw, right? It's got better for ripping cuts. And this is my crosscut saw. So my crosscut saw, my Tenon saw, cuts across the grain really nicely. Now I could do that, a ripping cut with this, but let's try and use the grain of the wood to our benefit, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a vise. Now on a building site you wouldn't have access to a vise, you'd be working, so you have to clamp this to a table somehow. Now I'm going to use a chisel, right? So here's my chisel, nice and sharp chisel, right? It's my widest chisel I got in the box, 25mm chisel. And what I'm going to do, look, is I'm going to line it up, and you'll see one of the properties of the wood is that it likes to split along the grain of the wood. So if I just do this slightly and tap it, look, you will find that quickly and effectively it'll remove the wood that I want taken away. I haven't cut quite far enough through on that one, look. Put that back in the rack so it doesn't get missing. So you can see that I've cut half of that timber away, just needs a bit of a tidy up with the chisel. I can do that for you now, so you can see what I mean. So put that in. Sometimes you don't need to have the mallet. And a good way to think about not cutting yourself with a chisel is both hands go behind the blade of the chisel. So you never chisel with your hand by here. Okay, it's going to run straight into your hand. So just screw that up like that. Look, if you put the chisel flat on that cut, you can see and gauge whether it's a nice flat edge that cut or not, right? So there's my first 90-degree cut off the edge of a piece of wood. That's quite a useful joint to be able to cut. My other one I want to chop out then is the one for the housing joint. So I'll just quickly go on the inside of that line, look, and I will cut halfway down and stop. I'll do the same on this one. Halfway down and stop. So I've got two cuts that go halfway down, and I'm going to chop this one out using the same technique with the chisel. But on this one, I'm going to do something slightly different, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to chop from both sides, all right? So I'm going to come from this side, aim the chisel slightly upwards, and chiseling to the middle of the timber. So as you can see, I've taken a wrap going up here, and I'm going to turn the timber around, and I'm going to do the same but from the other side. And the reason we do it this way is because there's less chance of splitting out the back of the wood, which isn't supported anyway. Nice sharp chisel, that's quite a nice thing to be doing actually. Take your time though, don't expect it to all come out perfectly in one piece. Just small bits at a time, both hands behind the blade until you've got something that's getting quite flat, and then just clean it up with your chisel. Put your chisel flat on it, see if there's any high points. Pile them away. Okay, so you can see the techniques we can use to mark out and cut the wood safely.